On a night when the storm was tearing Chicago apart, a man named Jonathan Reed was driving home through the downpour, the kind of rain that makes the streets feel like rivers and the city itself feel swallowed by shadows. He was a millionaire, yes, but not the type you imagine in glossy magazines. He was lonely, disillusioned, a man who had all the comforts money could buy but none of the warmth of real companionship. His life was polished on the outside, but cold and empty within. That night he thought he was just heading back to another glass of scotch in his penthouse, another night staring out at the skyline that no longer impressed him. But fate had different plans. Because in the middle of that storm, headlights cutting through the sheets of rain, Jonathan saw something that froze him in his seat. A figure moving desperately through the night. At first it seemed impossible. A woman, barefoot, soaked to the skin, her wedding dress heavy and clinging to her body. She was running, not strolling, not lost, but running like her life depended on every step. Each flash of lightning revealed her outline clearer and clearer, until Jonathan could see the terror etched across her face. She wasn't just a bride out of place, not some spectacle you might glimpse and forget. She was someone escaping, someone fleeing, and every instinct in Jonathan's body told him she needed help. He slowed the car, rolled down the window, and called out through the roar of the storm. What happened next would change his life forever, because she wasn't just a runaway bride. She was running for her life. And this night, the night he thought would be like any other, would mark the beginning of the greatest love story he would ever know. Before we dive deeper, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you, and don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. Jonathan Reed thought he was simply offering kindness to a stranger on a stormy night, but nothing about this woman was ordinary. Why had she fled her wedding? What kind of pain or danger could force a bride, dressed for the most important day of her life, to abandon everything and run barefoot through the streets of Chicago? And perhaps the most haunting question of all, what was she really running from? In that single encounter, Jonathan stepped into a mystery larger than himself, one that would challenge everything he believed about loyalty, family, and love. The deeper he became involved, the more he realized that helping her would come at a cost that would nearly destroy him. Stay with us, because by the end of this story, nothing will be as it seems. Jonathan Reed was 34 years old, a man who had earned more than most people could imagine, yet carried himself with the quiet air of someone who no longer found joy in any of it. His penthouse overlooked the skyline, glass walls stretching high above the city, but at night those windows reflected only his own loneliness back at him. He was the kind of man who could close million-dollar deals with a single phone call, but struggled to remember the last time he'd laughed with someone who cared about him, not his money. Empty dinners, long tables set for one, the ticking of an expensive watch marking hours spent in silence. This was the life Jonathan knew. To the outside world he had it all, but to Jonathan, it felt hollow, as though every success only deepened the void he carried inside. Gabrielle, on the other hand, was just 28, a woman of intelligence and grace, who had grown up surrounded not by freedom but by expectations. From childhood, her path had been drawn for her, shaped by a father who believed family was about alliances and appearances, not dreams or choices. She was beautiful, yes, but more than that. She was thoughtful, resilient, and yearning for a life that was her own. Yet every time she spoke of wanting something different, she was reminded of duty, reminded of the man chosen for her. Harrison Brooks, wealthy, powerful, polished, and in every way the image of stability her family admired. But behind closed doors, Harrison was controlling, cold, and saw Gabrielle not as a partner, but as an ornament, something to be displayed when it suited him and silenced when it didn't. For Gabrielle, the wedding had been inevitable. Every detail planned, every guest list decided, the weight of tradition and family reputation pressing on her shoulders until the idea of escape seemed impossible. But inside she carried a fire, a refusal to surrender completely, and it was that fire that would one day drive her into the storm. She was not merely a bride running from a ceremony. She was a woman fighting for freedom in the only way she knew how. And though Jonathan Reed could not have known it that night, when he opened his car door to her, he was stepping into her battle. Harrison Brooks was not a man who accepted defeat. To him, control was everything, and losing Gabrielle was not something he would allow. The rain that night was relentless, hammering against the windshield as Jonathan Reed turned onto a quiet street. His world, normally so predictable, shifted in an instant when he saw her. A young woman in a drenched wedding gown, barefoot, hair plastered to her face, running as though the storm itself was chasing her. He slowed, unsure if his eyes were deceiving him, but the look in hers erased all doubt. This was not a woman caught in a playful moment. This was desperation. He lowered the window, called out, offered help. At first she froze, hesitating as though stepping toward him might carry a price too heavy to pay. The rain poured harder, the thunder shook the air, and only then did she finally slide into his car, trembling, silent, her breath shallow with fear. Jonathan didn't know her name yet, but in that moment, he knew her life had changed his. When Jonathan led her into his penthouse, the contrast could not have been sharper. Towering windows stretched over the glittering Chicago skyline. The leather furniture gleamed under soft lights, and the scent of cedar filled the air. Yet there she stood, Gabrielle, soaked to the skin, her white dress torn and muddied, her shoes gone, her hair dripping onto the marble floor. She looked impossibly out of place, like a ghost haunting the life of luxury he had built. He offered her a blanket, warm clothes, food, anything to ease her shivering frame, but she spoke little. Every question he asked, her name, where she had come from, who she was running from, was met with silence, a shake of the head, or a vague answer that only deepened the mystery. It was clear she was hiding something, but what? And why did her eyes flick toward the window every few seconds, as if she feared being followed? As the storm raged outside, Jonathan could feel the weight of her silence pressing against him. She clutched a phone tightly as though it was the last thread tying her to a world she was desperate to escape. He watched her fingers tremble against its cracked screen, watched her eyes flash with something between terror and defiance. Then it happened. The phone lit up in the dim light of the room. One word appeared across the screen. Incoming call. Harrison. Gabrielle's jaw tightened, her knuckles whitened around the phone, and without a word she pressed the screen dark. She turned her face away, but Jonathan had seen it. Whoever Harrison was, he wasn't just someone she was avoiding. He was the reason she was running. In the days that followed, Jonathan Reed and Gabrielle began to form a fragile bond. It started in small gestures. He made her hot chocolate when she couldn't sleep. She left daisies from the corner florist on his kitchen counter as a silent thank you. Their late-night conversations stretched until dawn, both of them confessing truths they had hidden from the world. For Jonathan, it was his loneliness, the emptiness that wealth could never fill. For Gabrielle, it was the crushing weight of expectations she had never asked for. In those quiet moments, she seemed almost free, almost unafraid. But beneath the warmth of their growing connection, shadows still lingered. Was she truly safe in Jonathan's world, or had danger only followed her into a new address? The storm outside had passed, but in many ways, the one surrounding Gabrielle was only beginning. Outside Jonathan's penthouse walls, another story was taking shape. Harrison Brooks, the man Gabrielle had left standing at the altar, was not willing to accept her disappearance quietly. He hired private investigators, men who drove black SUVs through Chicago's narrow streets, who made discreet phone calls from unmarked offices, who tapped phones and traced financial records with cold precision. For Harrison, this was not about heartbreak. It was about control, about reclaiming what he believed was his. And as headlines began to surface, socialite bride missing on wedding day, the media turned Gabrielle into a story, a mystery for the public to consume. Yet for Gabrielle herself, every headline was another reminder that her past was not finished with her. No matter how far she tried to run, Harrison's reach was long, and his obsession was unyielding. For a time, Jonathan's home became a sanctuary, a place where Gabrielle could breathe, where she could remember what it felt like to laugh without fear. But that peace was fragile, always at risk of breaking. Every time the phone rang unexpectedly, her body stiffened. Every time headlights paused too long outside the building, she would draw the curtain tight. And then it happened. Just when Gabrielle thought she could breathe again, when she believed for a fleeting moment that freedom might be possible, they found her. It happened at the farmer's market on a quiet Saturday morning. For a brief moment, Gabrielle seemed almost like anyone else. Her hair tied back, a faint smile as she picked fresh fruit, her laughter soft and genuine as Jonathan teased her about never cooking. But then her phone rang. She froze mid-step, her eyes darting to the screen, her face draining of color. She whispered only 3 words to Jonathan. "They found me." In that instant, the fragile peace she had built with him shattered. No more hiding behind silence, no more vague answers. Jonathan could see it in her trembling hands. This was the moment she could no longer keep her truth buried. Later that night, with tears streaming down her face, Gabrielle finally confessed. She told Jonathan her real name, her past, and the chain of events that had led her into the storm. She revealed how her father had arranged her engagement to Harrison Brooks, not for love, but for a merger of fortunes and influence. She had been treated as currency, a bride chosen not for her heart, but for what her presence at Harrison's side could secure. "I'm not a gold digger," she cried, her voice breaking. "I never wanted any of this. I just wanted to be free." Jonathan, who had built his life on walls of wealth and isolation, reached for her hand. In his voice was no judgment, only steady reassurance. He believed her. He saw her for who she was, a woman fighting for her own life. But while Jonathan's world shifted toward compassion, Harrison's world burned with rage. In his own home, he tore through papers, shouting orders into phones, furious that Gabrielle had humiliated him and his family. To him, she was not a woman. She was possession, an agreement sealed by her father, an asset stolen from him. And now, Harrison was more determined than ever to reclaim her. He was not alone. Gabrielle's father stood behind him, arms folded, eyes cold, backing Harrison in his pursuit. For them, this was about more than marriage. It was about reputation, power, and control. Together, they made a vow. Gabrielle would return no matter the cost. As the story paused, the voice of history seemed to echo. For centuries, marriage was never about love. It was about power, wealth, and control. And those who resisted, especially women, were seen as threats, as dangerous to the order their families tried to preserve. Gabrielle was one of them. She wanted freedom, and that alone made her dangerous. The reflection was clear and chilling. Gabrielle was not just fleeing a wedding. She was resisting an entire system built on control. And then came the moment Jonathan had feared. It was late, the city quiet, the air heavy with tension. Inside his penthouse, Gabrielle sat curled on the couch, her eyes swollen from tears, Jonathan beside her offering silent strength. Then, the doorbell rang. Both froze, the sound slicing through the silence. Slowly, Jonathan rose, walked toward the door, and opened it. Standing there in the hall were 2 figures, Harrison Brooks and Gabrielle's father. The door had barely opened before Harrison Brooks forced his way inside, his presence filling the penthouse like a storm that had finally caught up with them. His eyes locked on Gabrielle, not with affection, but with fury, the kind of rage that came from pride wounded in public. "Do you have any idea what you've done?" he shouted, his voice echoing against the glass walls. "You've humiliated me, humiliated this family." Gabrielle shrank back, her body trembling, but her silence spoke louder than words. Behind Harrison stood her father, his face carved from stone, his voice cutting through the air with chilling detachment. "You've embarrassed this family. You will fix this." To them, Gabrielle was not a daughter or a bride. She was a contract broken, a deal undone, and they had come to enforce their claim. Jonathan stepped forward, no longer the quiet bystander, but a man who could not remain silent while injustice unfolded before him. "She owes you nothing," he said firmly, his voice carrying the weight of his conviction. "She is not your possession, not your bargaining chip. She has the right to choose her own life." Harrison's head snapped toward him, eyes narrowing, lips curling into a sneer. "Stay out of this, Reed. You don't know what you're getting yourself into." The room erupted into overlapping voices, Gabrielle's father demanding obedience, Harrison throwing accusations, Jonathan raising his voice in defense. It was chaos, the clash of power, money, and will, each word sharper than the last. In the midst of the shouting, Harrison moved closer, his polished shoes clicking against the marble floor as he approached Jonathan. For a long, tense moment, the noise around them faded, and it was just the two men, standing face to face. Harrison leaned in, his voice dropping to a whisper only Jonathan could hear. "You have no idea who you're dealing with." It wasn't a threat shouted in anger. It was a promise, cold and deliberate, carrying with it the weight of something much darker waiting in the shadows. The next morning, the penthouse was silent. Too silent. Jonathan Reed called out her name, but the rooms were empty, the blankets on the couch folded neatly, her presence erased as though she had never been there at all. Panic set in. Gabrielle was gone. The questions came fast and heavy. Had she chosen to leave him behind, fearing the weight of the danger closing in? Or had she been taken, pulled back into the grip of the very people she was running from? The uncertainty gnawed at Jonathan, every unanswered call and every empty street corner tightening the knot in his chest. She had trusted him, and now she had vanished. Jonathan searched the city with desperation that bordered on madness. He drove through rain-slicked streets, checked hospitals, and called every number he could find, his voice breaking as he described Gabrielle to strangers who had no answers. At the same time, Harrison Brooks and Gabrielle's father tightened their own net, using investigators, connections, and shadowy favors to track her down. Black SUVs appeared on quiet corners, men in suits watched from a distance, and whispers spread in places Jonathan could not reach. The city seemed to close in, suffocating him with the weight of secrets and power he could not fight. Everywhere Jonathan turned, there were false leads that kept hope alive and crushed him in equal measure. Once, late at night, he saw her, or thought he did. A woman in a wedding dress walking in the distance, her figure blurred in the fog and streetlight. He sprinted toward her, calling Gabrielle's name, only to find a stranger who turned with startled eyes, not the woman he had given his heart to. Each disappointment cut deeper, pushing him closer to despair. And then came the moment that chilled him to his core. Near his car, glinting faintly against the wet pavement, he found it, Gabrielle's necklace, the same delicate piece she had worn on that stormy night when their worlds first collided. When Gabrielle was finally found, the truth she carried was heavier than the storm that had first brought her into Jonathan Reed's life. She revealed that her flight from the wedding had not been just about avoiding a loveless marriage. Harrison Brooks was not only controlling, he was dangerous. His ties stretched into organized crime, into business dealings designed not for growth, but for power, fear, and silence. To marry him would have meant surrendering her freedom, her voice, and perhaps even her life. Jonathan listened in stunned silence, realizing that his choice to protect her had pulled him into a world of shadows where powerful men destroyed anyone who stood in their way. The story spilled into the public eye, turning into a spectacle. There was a courtroom, not just of law but of reputation, where Gabrielle stood tall and told the world what Harrison truly was. With cameras flashing and reporters circling, she testified against him, her voice steady though her body trembled. Her father sat on the opposite side, denying everything, treating his daughter as a liability rather than blood. Harrison's lawyers tore at her words. The media painted her as both a victim and a rebel. And through it all, Jonathan remained close, knowing this was bigger than love. It was survival. On the eve of her testimony, when the noise of the outside world faded, Gabrielle turned to Jonathan, her eyes wet but burning with resolve. "I need you to understand," she whispered, her voice breaking under the weight of everything at stake. "This isn't just about clearing my name or escaping him. It's about finally being free, and no matter what happens tomorrow, know this: I love you." For Jonathan, it was a moment of clarity. Their story had started with a storm, but what bound them now was stronger than fear. It was love forged in danger, and it would either save them or destroy them both. The courtroom became a theater of reckoning. Harrison Brooks was exposed for what he truly was. His network of corruption dragged into the light, his arrogance shattered by testimony he could not silence. Gabrielle's words broke the chain of silence, and the evidence presented left little room for doubt. The verdict was clear. Harrison's empire was built on intimidation and lies. For a moment, it seemed as though justice had been served. Gabrielle's father, once a respected figure, sat humiliated, his reputation crumbling under the weight of betrayal and scandal. For Gabrielle, this was more than victory. It was liberation. But justice, as Jonathan Reed would learn, is not always permanent. In a twist that stunned even those who had followed the case closely, Harrison posted bail. One morning, the headlines blazed: Harrison Brooks released, whereabouts unknown. He had vanished into the shadows, leaving behind a trail of fear and the knowledge that he was still out there. For some, justice is temporary. For others, it's forever running. Seeking peace away from the noise, Jonathan and Gabrielle retreated to his lake house, the same place where she had first whispered her love under the stars. There, by the water's edge, they exchanged quiet promises, vows of love spoken not in a church or courtroom, but in the sanctuary of honesty and trust. It should have been a moment of serenity, a promise of a future rebuilt. Yet as the camera of memory lingers, a black car waits at a distance, silent, watching. A reminder that storms do not always end when the skies clear and some shadows follow no matter how far you run. No, in the quiet after the storm, Jonathan Reed and Gabrielle stood at the edge of the lake, their voices hushed, their hearts bound by promises spoken not before an altar, but before the truth of their shared struggle. Yet questions remain. Was this truly the end of their story, or only the beginning of another storm waiting beyond the horizon? Could love alone shield them from the shadows of power still watching from a distance? And for Jonathan, who chose to risk everything for a woman running barefoot through the rain, what would the cost of that choice ultimately be? What would you have done if you were in Jonathan's place? Let us know in the comments, and don't forget to hit subscribe so you never miss the next story.